Today in Data Bytes, I am going to talk about air travel. Now, in air travel, there is one aspect in which the traveling public, that is me and you, all are guilty and are at fault. Probably we don't even realize that we are at fault when it comes to this aspect of air travel. I am talking about when you travel with children on an aircraft. Do you know that the maximum risk in air travel is for kids, not for adults? I don't think you give too much attention to the safety of a child when you travel by air. And probably I cannot even blame all of you. This is probably because incidents involving kids in the air are very rare. Probably once in 10 years you might hear of such an incident. And that is probably the reason too that me, you, governments, and the airlines don't pay the attention to this aspect as much as it is due. A quick word about Data Bytes for those of you who don't know about this program. I do this program in place of the usual what does this data say once in a while. It is not a regular program. In Data Bytes section, I present facts and figures about issues relevant to the public at large. At times, the data could be unpalatable or even disturbing. Viewer caution is advised. Data Bytes is not a regular program. I present this occasionally and only when something important crops up and viewers need to be made aware of. You can find more such programs on my YouTube channel under the playlist Data Bytes as well as on my website theinfodiggers.com. Now today's program is one such program where I urge all of you to see this program till the very end. Now today's topic is infant safety during flights. I'll relate one incident when recently I was traveling by air and there was a young lady sitting next to me, that is the window seat. The middle seat was empty. She was having a 8-month baby with her. The air hostess handed over her the child seat belt, which she was supposed to tie around the baby, but she refused to do so. The air hostess reminded her a couple of times, but she did not pay attention. The flight was uneventful. We all landed at the destination. However, by not heeding attention to the air hostess, the young lady had unknowingly put the baby to an enormous risk on that flight. But then I'm sure all of us would have acted in a similar manner sometime or the other in the past. Now, I'm sure you would all remember this air accident which happened on 7th August 2020, about 2 years ago, where Air India Express aircraft crashed while attempting to land in inclement weather at Kozhikode Airport. There were 184 passengers on board, including 10 infants. 19 passengers were fatally injured, including 3 infants. Infants and children are always at a greater risk when an air incident or a crash happens. This is the Fatalities and Injuries table, which is from the same flight IX1344, which was landing at Kozhikode. Now, if you look at the ratio of fatalities, out of the 10 infants and children on board, 3 suffered fatal injuries and 3 serious, which is 33% of the total. Compare that with adults, where only 9% of the adults suffered fatal injuries. Of course, the 2 crew members who died were the 2 pilots. The Director General of Civil Aviation, or the DGCA, took more than 1 year to complete the investigation. The final investigation report was published last September. Also note that the maximum damage in this accident happened to the front part of the aircraft. Now I'm going to tell you about what happened to those 10 infants on this flight. There were 10 infants on board, as I said, who were less than 2 years and were not allotted any independent seat. The infants were sitting on the lap of their guardian both during takeoff as well as during landing. Of the 10 infants on lap, 3 sustained fatal injuries and 3 had serious injuries. Now, this is the seat map of the aircraft which shows where the infants were seated. One of the infants was seated in row 2A, the other in row 23C. Both infants died while the co passengers survived this crash. The third infant who died was in row 25C. Here, the infant and the passenger both died. Now, it is quite disturbing that this final investigation report does not hold anyone accountable for a major lapse. The report says that Air India Express does not have provision for child or infant restraint system, and they rely solely on lap held infants without even supplemental restraint. It further says that the Manual on Approval and Use of Child Restraint Systems was approved by International Civil Aviation Organization, but the airline doesn't follow that because such incidents happen very rarely. So neither the DGCA nor the airline were responsible for not having a child restraint system on board, which may have saved the lives of a few more babies. Now, you may also note that the DGCA till now had never asked the airlines to implement a child restraint system. It's only now, after the Kozhikode crash, does the DGCA wake up and sends an advisory to all airline operators to implement a child restraint system specifically designed to protect and restrain an infant or child during all phases of a flight. And when does this advisory come from the DGCA? It comes on 14th February 2022, almost 1.5 years after the crash had happened. Now, this is the speed of the wheel of governance in our country. Now, note that this is an advisory. It is not a mandatory direction to airlines to implement the child restraint system. Though the guideline says the safest way to secure an infant or a child on board is the child restraint system in a dedicated seat appropriate for that infant or child, and then they go on to say that it is advised that the airlines may encourage and increase the use of child restraint systems. I will tell you more about the child restraint system, and I'll just complete this section. Now, I have tweeted to several airlines last week to know the status of the child restraint system in their airline. None of them have so far responded to my tweet, but I'm going to follow this up by writing letters, or I'll be raising an RTI with the DGCA. First, let me tell you what is an infant harness. The infant harness you must have all seen while traveling on an airplane. It is an extension seat belt which is attached to the co-passenger seat belt on one side, and then the baby is held in this position most of the time. However, this position is the wrong way to attach a baby to the infant harness. Having the baby in the front and facing the forward seat is putting the baby at a grave risk. The correct way of holding a baby on an infant harness is in the manner which is shown in this slide. The baby must be held facing the passenger with the back towards the front seat and properly secured. Now, this kind of belt which secures the baby on the shoulders and the lower half is probably not available on the airline, but it is available in the commercial market and one can procure such seat belts. Now we come to child restraint system. A child restraint system is not a seat belt. It is a combination of multiple seat belts which secures and restrains an infant during all phases of the flight. This is how the child restraint system looks. There is a belt on top which slides over the seat and then adjusts near the shoulders of the child. Then there are two straps which have loops which go into this seat belt, and then they are tied to the normal seat belt. At times, the airline may give a non-slip mat also to the child, so in case of an event, the child doesn't slip forward. Now, these set of 3-4 seat belts can be folded in a very convenient manner, and I am sure all airlines have enough space to carry 15-20 of the child restraint system belts. So, what happens if you don't secure a child properly or are holding the child in your lap? I'm going to now explain. As you are all aware, there are three important phases of a flight. The first is a takeoff, and the incident happens if the takeoff has to be aborted. It could be due to a technical malfunction in the aircraft, or it could be a bird strike, or it could be even a reason that the pilot spots someone on the runway. The second most important phase in the flight is landing, and that is where most of the accidents happen. Now, there could be many reasons. The aircraft can be landing on a wet runway, it can slip, it can overshoot the runway, as happened in Kozhikode. Landing during rain on a wet runway is always risky. And lastly, there is always a risk of mid-air turbulence. Now, in all three phases of the flight, the children are the ones who are at maximum risk. I will be showing you some videos which show that even at slow speeds, the impact is enough to injure the baby seriously or even kill the infant. Now, stay with me because this section is going to be the most important. You may never realize that while an aircraft is taxiing, it appears that it is very slow and people start getting up or walking around. Now, that itself is very dangerous. Though the taxi speeds are typically around 30 to 35 km per hour, but when the aircraft moves towards the runway, the speed can go up to 50 to 60 kilometers per hour. I recall one incident when I was traveling from Hyderabad to Chennai on a Air India flight. The pilot had started to taxi towards the runway, and for some reason, he had to apply sudden brakes. The steward, who was then walking in the gallery and walking towards the pilot's cabin, fell on the ground with such a great force that he slipped almost 15 to 20 feet, banged his head against the pilot's cockpit door, and then he fell unconscious. Of course, the plane then returned and the person was deplaned and later on did recover from his injuries. So, slow speed impact are dangerous too. So, what are the speeds of the aircraft when accidents or incidents happen? The first one I have already told you is taxiing, where the speeds are between 30 to 50 kilometers per hour. There are two more speeds which you should be aware of. The first one is called V1. This is the speed beyond which the takeoff should not be aborted. Now, if it is aborted, then the plane can meet with an accident. The second one is VR, or sometimes called rotate. This is the speed at which the pilot lifts the nose of the aircraft into the air and it is set to fly. The typical range for V1 for most of the commercial aircraft is in the range of 220 to 260 kilometers per hour, and that of VR between 275 and 300 kilometers per hour. So, if any accident happens on an aircraft, we are talking of impact speeds between 50 kilometers per hour to 300 kilometers per hour. Now, check out this following video. It has been done for a car crash test, but the results apply equally to an aircraft crash as well, maybe much more in magnitude.
Sitting on the lap of an adult who is not wearing a belt is not as safe as you might think. This U.S. crash test proves the point very effectively. Lying on the rear seat without a belt is also dangerous. In a collision at 50 kilometers an hour, a child weighing 20 kilos is subjected to forces corresponding to the weight of a baby elephant. This crash test shows what happens to children sitting without safety belts in the luggage compartment of an estate car if it is hit from behind.
A parent is driving with a baby in the passenger seat. In the back, a 10-year-old with a 3-year-old kneeling and looking out of the back window. Neither is in a seatbelt.
This is a 30-mile-an-hour crash test. The front of the vehicle is well deformed, but the passenger compartment in this test has remained stable.
As told in the video, a car crashing at around 50 kilometers per hour would exert the weight equivalent to a baby elephant on a child. Here are some impact forces which are going to surprise you. At 30 kilometers per hour, the force on a child weighing 12 kilograms will be around 200 kilograms. Whereas the same car, if it is traveling at 50 kilometers per hour and the same kid is sitting in the car, the impact on him will be equivalent to around 600 kilograms, which is the weight of a baby elephant. And lastly, at 250 kilometers, the child weighing 12 kgs will bear an impact upwards of 600 kgs and can even go up to facing a force of 1000 kilogram. It all depends on the collision impact distance. So here is something which I suggest all of you should start doing on your next flight. And if you are traveling with an infant or a child, start asking the crew for a child restraint system. Maybe the airline may not have the system and regret, but if we all begin to start asking, some airline someday will make a beginning and others will follow suit. The government or the airline on its own is not going to implement this system very soon. I hope all your flights remain safe forever, but there's nothing wrong in taking precautions. Please spread the awareness. Please share this video with people you know, mothers whom you know. At least for the next time, you can use the baby harness in a proper way till the child restraint systems get implemented. Thank you very much and namaskar.